I feel like we're getting what I've been asking, begging for, romance. Episode 6 of The Acolyte has left me with a lot of questions. Is Osha falling for it? Is she falling for Qimir? And if hate leads to the dark side, then what does love lead to? Because we are going to attempt to answer some of these questions. Do some makeup, hang out with the girlies, talk about love, romance, and shipping, my favorite things to talk about in Star Wars. If you're new here, my name is Crystal Kyber, like the Kyber crystals in Star Wars, and I love talking about Star Wars. So hi, welcome. I'm glad that you're here, and if you're returning, then hi, how are you? Good to have you back. And if you're ever interested in what makeup products I'm using, I'll have them listed in the description, just for you. To be fair, I'm going to talk about the things that I liked in this episode, and then I'm going to talk about the things that I didn't like. This episode came in hot, like hot, and I feel like it broke the internet again. I feel like we're getting what I've been asking, begging for like years. I want romance in Star Wars, and I'm not just talking about like side characters that are romantic together. I want romance to be part of the plot, and I don't want it to be tragic love. I'm so sad of any time that we get like any sort of romance in Star Wars, it ends tragically. I'm so over it. Star Wars, answer for your crimes. Chat, that hurt my feelings. So I obviously think that we are getting enemies to lovers. I mean, Leslie Headland did do an interview, and she said, enemies to lovers, baby, let's go. And I said, yes, thank you, Leslie. I use my Darth Vader palette from Pop Cosmetics. I'm gonna try to use as much of my Star Wars makeup as I possibly can. This palette is called Sith Seduction. Try to fit this in, though I don't really gravitate towards these colors, so we'll see. Maybe this one. Let's just do it. Let's just put it on. Do I think that Qimir is manipulating Osha? 100%. Because this show has just been like so straightforward with its storytelling that that's not what's happening, and that actually is an enemies to lovers story, because that would be really cool. But to be serious for a minute, this show really has been pushing the narrative of Osha and May being a dyad through the Force. It's all about like their duality, two halves of the same coin, as above, so below, I am you, you are me. They've been like really pushing that like this whole show. Like the symbolism through the whole show is really crazy. And if we were to like follow that route, I think it would be really interesting if by the end of the show that Osha were to go to the dark side and May were to join the Jedi. I think that that would be so interesting storytelling wise. The first half of the season, Osha was with the good guys, and then the last half, she's with the bad guys. The symbolism in this episode is really great. I mean, you have this whole aspect of the stranger never revealing his true self to May. He literally wears a mask with May, cannot be vulnerable, cannot be himself. And then when Qimir is with Osha, he's literally naked. Like, he is at his most vulnerable when he's with her. And he's being honest and truthful. Well, kind of. We'll get into that. I mean, there's such a stark difference between the way that he treats May and the way that he treats Osha. Like, he's literally bearing his soul to Osha. And while I do think some of that is a game, like, I think that he is trying to get something out of her. I really think that he's trying to use her for his own benefit, but that doesn't necessarily mean that he is being malicious or evil. Like, yes, he's an evil character, but as he says, it's all semantics. And we also see him get jealous when Osha brings up Sol, but Sol represents something that Qimir never had. He never had a pupil, he never had a student, he never had that bond. I think that there's a lot of subtext there when he says that he wants the power of two. Like, is he talking about the rule of two and, you know, the Sith rule of two? Does Qimir have a Sith that he answers to, and by him gaining his own apprentice, he can overthrow the Sith? Or does he want the power of a Force dyad? Or does he want the power of two, like him and an apprentice? Like, there's a lot of questions there. It's very interesting, like the direction that we're gonna go into. I love that Osha is literally being seduced by the dark side. Like, I love that. We never got that in Star Wars before. We just have crusty, dusty men not seducing anyone to the dark side. So I love that we're getting like this side of the dark side. I love that we're exploring new territories. I love seeing like why the dark side is so appealing, because there's a reason why the Jedi have to resist it so hard, or why it's so easily why you're so easily able to be corrupted. You know, also my eyeliner, it's not even, but it's okay. I think it's okay. One thing about me is enemies to lovers will always be my favorite trope. To hate someone so much that you fall in love with them, like, they're giving us the symbolism. They're giving us amazing lines that honestly, some of them feel straight out of a fan fiction. And I mean that in the best possible way. Like, I'm like, what is happening? I cannot look at this man speak to Osha. Like, what is he saying? What are those words coming out of his mouth? Because they sure had more than one meaning. If you're not going to join me, then let me put clothes on. Screaming. Like, how can you not ship them? Even the music was so romantic. Dude, the music was manipulating me. Unlike last week's episode, I feel like this week's episode did a really good job at telling and not showing. The first 10 minutes, we don't get any dialogue between Qimir and Osha, and I thought that that was such an interesting choice. And when you don't have your characters talk to each other, you really have to be creative and figure out how to tell a story, and I feel like they did that really well here. I think the dialogue between most of the characters this week was actually pretty on point. A lot of like hidden meanings and a lot of like saying things and us as the audience having to interpret them, which I really like that. Like, I do have a bone to pick with some of the dialogue, so we'll put a pin in that and come back to it in a little bit. Something that Qimir does a lot in this episode is he says Osha's name over and over, and I think that is such a just interesting detail, because in the previous episode when Osha was with the Jedi did not use her name at all. They called her civilian. I think that Qimir really validates Osha in a way that she's never been validated before. Qimir gives her the chances to kill him. He lets her know that it's all her choice. The whole episode, he's just inviting her. He's like really enticing her to the dark side. Like, there's layers to this. We also see Qimir validate Osha's use of the Force, or power in the Force, and the Jedi don't do that at all. When Osha tries to tell them that she's like feeling something through the Force, they kind of brush it off. They have more important things to worry about, whereas in this episode, Qimir, he's like, girl, you're the only thing I have to worry about. Like, I don't know, is it manipulation or is it what she deserves? That's what I want to know. And then you have this scene where Osha pulls a lightsaber on Qimir. Dude, that is so enemies to lovers. Like, there's so much tension all aboard the ship. I do think, though, that whole thing with the lightsaber is like an illusion of control. I don't really think that Qimir would let Osha kill him. Like, there's no way. He's like a powerful dark side user. Full Jedi were no match for him. Like, Osha would be no problem for him. I think that Qimir was letting Osha kind of have the upper hand there. I really do think that it was part of a bigger game that Qimir has been playing and played with Sol in the previous episode. Qimir had more power in that moment than we all realize. I think that Qimir has a lot more power than he like lets on. Like, I think he kind of like plays these games. I really think when Qimir had told her, when you lose everything, you're finally free, I really think that's the moment that she really started her descent down the dark side. At the end of the episode, Osha puts on Qimir's helmet, and I was watching Star Wars Explains after show live show, and they were saying that if the dark side is a drug, this is kind of like Osha's gateway drug to the dark side. Like, once she puts on this helmet, there's kind of like no going back. I really want her to like flip her script. You know, Osha has been like so, I don't want to say like weak, but she's been so disconnected from herself, from her family. She's been so like blank and just kind of like there, like she has no personality. It'd be really cool if she turned to the dark side and just blossomed, just became like this force to be reckoned with. But the Qimir and Osha romance is not the only thing that happened in this episode. Let's talk about Vernestra. I feel like this episode we really got more of her character, and I feel like she was being so suspect. And I feel like now I'm finally getting a sense of her character, and I'm liking her more and more. Let's talk about the lightsaber whip, the controversial lightsaber whip. I don't like the idea of the lightsaber whip at all. I think that it's cheesy, and I don't think that it's very cool, and I just don't like it. And seeing it in this episode, she used her lightsaber whip to kill a bug. Like, what? Like, they couldn't think of a better way to introduce the lightsaber whip or have her use her lightsaber whip. That's what we're using the lightsaber whip for. Like, I don't like it even more. I think that there was a reason why we got the lightsaber whip the same episode that we saw Qimir's back scars, because those back scars, they kind of look like lightsaber whips. Do they not? Interesting. If I can just put on my little fan theory cap real quick, this is what I think is happening. I think that Vernestra was Qyimir's master, and I think that he was her Padawan. And I think that Qimir started to lean towards the dark side, and I think that Vernestra tried to kill him. And I think that he lived, and I think that Vernestra told the Jedi Council that he died, and now she's realizing that he didn't die. And I think that maybe she feels responsible for Qyimir's turn to the dark side, and she doesn't want the Jedi to know about it. And so what I think is going to happen, she's going to frame everything on Sol to protect herself, and so that way the Jedi Council doesn't know that she had a big, massive mess up. I think that Qimir is Vernestra's deep, dark secret. So I do have to talk about Sol a little bit in this episode. I loved every scene that Sol was in. Like, I'm telling you, he carries the show on his back. There's the moment where he goes downstairs and just like kind of like gives into his emotions, and he like slams his fist on the desk, and then he just stares, and then he just goes and like does his Jedi duty. I feel like, God, the emotions on his face, like he has like really good subtle acting. His face just has so many emotions go across it. It's a beautiful long shot. It's probably my favorite shot in the whole episode. Let's talk about some of the things that I didn't like in this episode. Besides some of the stuff that I had said in my previous video about this show kind of lacking heart and substance, I'm still feeling that in this show. And while I do think that there's some really interesting things happening, I don't think that there's enough time to breathe. This show doesn't really settle, and I wish that we had time between characters and scenes to like really settle into what the show is trying to tell us. Especially in this episode, the writing is so inconsistent. While earlier in the video, I did really praise the dialogue and the writing between Qimir and Osha, there's also a section in the middle with Qimir and Osha that just is so bad. And Qimir is like, why do you think of yourself as a Jedi? They threw you away. And Osha says, I left. And he says, why? And then she says, I chose to. And then he goes, are you sure about that?
You sure about that?
And then she goes, let me go. Like, it's just so, like, it's so clunky, and it's not really written well, and they're not really saying anything to each other there. Not only are they not saying anything to each other, but their faces are not really giving me anything also. It'd be different if like one of the characters was like very much in anguish or had fear or had something going on, but like Osha was just kind of like flat, you know. And I said this on the podcast too, but it reminded me a lot of the behind the scenes video between Padme and Anakin in Attack of the Clones, and I'll put a clip here.
Where are you going?
To find Obi-Wan.
No, you're not.
Let go of me.
I think that's something this show did really well in the beginning and in the last half of the episode was there was a ton of subtext happening, and then for some reason right in the middle there's no subtext in what they're saying. I also think this episode has a lot of Sol specifically saying like, I'll explain everything, I'll tell the Jedi Order everything, I'll tell you everything. And we're kind of getting that a lot from Sol. Like, this is the third time he said it, but we're seeing it a lot in this episode. It's a lot of like setting something up, and we're not getting a payoff for it. When Sol captures May and is kind of describing to her that he's been waiting 16 years to have this conversation with her, and then that's the last thing that we hear. Like, I want to hear the conversation. Don't tell me you're going to have the conversation. Give us the conversation. This was the shortest episode that we've ever had in a Star Wars series, and I feel like it would have really benefited to have more screen time. And, you know, we're streaming these episodes, so we don't need to worry about commercial breaks. We can really do whatever we want with the format of TV or short form storytelling. And it kind of feels like we're having to fix things in editing. And that's why like the episodes are so short. That's why some of the dialogue and some of the edits are kind of weird. The story arc between Osha and Qimir, and while I do really love that it's like an enemies to lovers sort of deal, I feel like Osha is just, she's not having a character arc. I think when she's first with Qimir, she should be like really scared or really unsure of him, not trusting of him, but she's just kind of like following him around like a puppy dog the whole time. And I kind of really wanted her to like have this progression of like not trusting him and being scared of him to like really being seduced to the dark side to trusting him enough to put on a sensory deprivation helmet. Like, girl, that is like a big deal. That is not something that we just glaze over. I wish we got a scene before she puts on the deprivation helmet where she kind of like works through her thoughts. Maybe she doesn't trust it. Maybe she makes sure that he can't see her do it, or like something where it's like she doesn't really trust it, but she's like intrigued, and she's gonna do it anyways, maybe against her better judgment. I think that would have been really interesting storytelling, and I guess that's what I'm gonna be reading on AO3 in the future, because I'm not getting that from this show. But you know, I think taking a few minutes like that to kind of flesh out character motivation and character wants and needs would be so beneficial for this show, because it's pretty flat. I do want to remind you all that I am guesting at the A+ Hero Report here on YouTube. I go live with them every Wednesday at 8 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. It's a live show, so come hang out in the chat, come theorize with us. It's a lot of fun. All right, I feel like this video was so rambly, but I had a lot of thoughts. I had a lot of different thoughts from this episode. I really think that this episode is my favorite one so far. And no, it's not just because of the romance and the yearning. Even though that does have like a big part of it, I really think that this episode did a really good job with storytelling and the writing. Even though there were some hiccups along the way, I can acknowledge that there were some bumpy bits to get to where we are. Overall, I feel like it was really solid. I hope you have an amazing rest of your day, and may the force be with you.